So this is seems a little ironic, but the book I'm reading from is called Unbelievable by John Shelby Sloan. He talks about the different resurrection stories, and this is one thing he says about Mark's resurrection story. Resurrection, you see, was not just something that happened to Jesus. It is also something that happens to and in each of us. We will see him, the promise of Mark's messenger seems to say, when our eyes are open to the meaning of God found in the midst of life, in the expression of love and in the courage to be. We are resurrected when we learn that God is present when we live fully, love wastefully, and become all that we are capable of being. Easter is an experience which thus functions in a number of ways. First, it opens our eyes. And second, it calls us to open the eyes of others and to enable those others to live, to love, and to be.
And here we have the Easter story from Mark 16, verses 1 through 8. When the Sabbath was over, Mary of Magdala, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome, bought perfumed oils so that they could anoint Jesus. Very early, just after sunrise on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb. They were saying to one another, "Who will roll back the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked, they found the huge stone had been rolled back. On entering the tomb, they saw a young person sitting on the right, dressed in a white robe. They were very frightened, but the youth reassured them, "Do not be amazed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, the one who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. Now go and tell the disciples and Peter, Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee, where you will see him just as he told you." They made their way out and fled from the tomb, bewildered and trembling, but they said nothing to anyone because they were so afraid.
You know how much people use their inclusive Bibles by how many pages fall out of them. Would you pray with me? Divine presence. Today is mysterious and full of surprises. A day where we need to set aside our limited thinking and go beyond our minds into a deeper space, into a greater understanding, into a place where all life is possible. And so as we celebrate this Easter, as we ponder and wonder, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of each of our hearts, be filled with your light and your wisdom. Amen. Excuse me a second. I got a scratchy throat all of a sudden. Each gospel has their own resurrection story. Even though Mark doesn't come first, wow, now I can't talk. Is this a sign? Just shut up, Kay. Even though Mark isn't the first gospel in the Bible, the way they've got it laid out, which is always very confusing, because Mark was the first one written. I think they did that because Matthew has the whole birth narrative, and so you're like, well, we'll start with the birth. But Mark was the first gospel of the four that was written. He's also the shortest. And part of the shortness is the way he ends the gospel. he ends it just the way that Teresa read it this morning. And we're all left here saying, what? Now what? How did we go from the women running away from the tomb afraid to 2,000 years we're still sitting here talking about it, right? Somebody told somewhere along the line. Sort of an unsatisfactory ending to the gospel. And people obviously in ancient times thought the same thing, because there are two additional endings that are added after this one, a shorter one and a longer one, that pretty much across the board people believe were added by scribes who just said, well, we can't end it there. There's no appearances of the risen Jesus. So let's add something in. The question for us today is, if we leave it at the original authentic ending, what do we do with it? And can we find a message? Can we challenge ourselves to find the message that lies within the Gospel of Mark the way it was originally written? So we turn to the youth in a white robe that the women find there. So the women gather up all their spices and they're going to take care of Jesus' body as soon as the Sabbath is over and they can do work again. And they show up at the tomb and the stones rolled away and there's nothing there, and then all of a sudden this white-robed youth, picture like Charlie showing up in your midst in a white robe, who says, what are you doing standing here staring at nothing? Jesus isn't here, clearly. He's gone ahead of you. Okay, so just as an aside, like, this white-robed youth turns into an angel in the other Gospels, which is interesting because I've worn a white robe a whole lot of times in my ministry and nobody's ever turned me into an angel. But somewhere along the line, that white-robed youth got a whole lot more credit. But he freaks out the women enough that they run away. Yet his message to them is what continues to resound for each of us. And the message is, don't look here. Because Jesus has gone ahead of you. Look for him in Galilee where he told you he would be. So in the passage that I read from Bishop John Shelby Spong, he has a compelling way of looking at this that really strikes me and makes a lot of sense for me. He suggests that Mark's saying to us that resurrection isn't, one, it's not about the resuscitation of a body, and two, it's not just about Jesus. He says, what if we look at this as Mark saying resurrection can be about all of us, that resurrection can happen for each and every one of us within us. What if Mark is saying that resurrection can happen when we stop looking at the empty tomb and we get back to life? And we say, God goes before us into life, let's look for the divine there. Spong says, Easter has two things to teach us. One is to open our eyes. To open our eyes to the fact that the empty tomb doesn't answer our questions about Jesus. That we have to go back out into the world to find those answers. But also, when it comes to the questions about each of our lives, because we all have those big questions about ourselves and our lives, and who are we, and what are we going to do with our lives, and where are we going? What if the answers for how we operate in the world don't live within the empty tombs of our own lives? What if the answers have gone before us into the world? So just to flesh out that metaphor, what is an empty tomb? For our own, metaphorically, what are the empty tombs of our lives? What do they look like? Our down days. What else? Loneliness. health challenges, dashed hopes, dashed dreams. What else? Carol? War. Violence of any kind, really. Fear. The fear that resides within us that we can't seem to let go of.
Losing loved ones.
Losing the grief, overwhelming grief sometimes that we continue to hang on to. What else?
Fear.
Fear. Like anything that holds us stagnant and unmoving. Anything that holds us in regret and shame and guilt and pain. Anything that keeps us from growing, that keeps us from experiencing, that keeps us from moving forward. So if we look at those as, the empty tombs of our lives, and we each have some, I dare to say, what's a resurrection then? What does resurrection look like? We can turn around and find something. If it happens in each of us and for each of us, what would it look like? Hope.
Inner strength.
Inner strength. Carol?
A hand reaching out to us.
A hand reaching out to us that we actually hold on to
Yes.
and are willing to accept help from. What else does resurrection look like?
New opportunity.
Awakening.
Whoa, too many at one time.
Love.
Love.
New opportunity.
New opportunities, new possibilities. Love not only offered but accepted.
Surviving an illness or cancer.
Surviving something that maybe you were worried about. Getting through, a second chance. New life. Maybe letting go of old ways of thinking that didn't work anymore. And finding something new that gives you direction, that gives you purpose, that helps you to see the world in a better, new light. All of these wonderful things. So, the question I'm going to ask you to consider today, that you don't have to answer, but these are my questions to consider, is what do you seek as you go through your life day after day? What do you seek, and where are you seeking it? Because the more I've sat with those questions, the more I'm convinced that we find what we seek. So by and large, I'm a fairly positive person. I'm kind of the glass half full girl, right? And so when I go through my days, I look for the good around me. I look for the beauty around me. I look for positive things around me. So when I'm walking down the street and the neighbor says hi and waves at me, or the person drives by and does one of these, I'm like, oh look, they did one of these and not just one of these. I relish that connection when I meet a new person and I get to know not only their dog's name, but their name. It feels good. When I go to the grocery store and I see the tiredness in the clerk's eyes, and yet she has a kind welcome for me, I'm grateful. I see the goodness there. When I see a mom with a baby who's like talking, Mariah's not looking at me. I think, I had a seminary professor who said that the cry of a child is the cry of hope, and you can't help but smile, and really he didn't have to leave because he's beautiful and he brings us hope. Even when I'm in that place, even the person who cuts me off with their car, I can have some grace for. Say, wow, they really must be in a hurry, have to get somewhere. Because God knows I have had my time or two probably of dashing across town and maybe not always driving the best that I could. We all need to be cut a little bit of slack. When I look for good, I find it. Now, when I'm having a not so good day, and I'm cranky and more negative, and I'm looking at that empty tomb of negativity, That's what I find. I don't want to talk to my neighbors. I don't care who they are. The clerk at the grocery store, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you are so slow. They really should not be having you do this because you just frustrate people. And I stand there tapping my foot. The woman with the kid, the 3 kids who are all over the place, I just roll my eyes and walk the other way. And the person who cuts me off, don't get me started. When I look for the negative, I find the negative. And I told you a couple weeks ago that when I started preaching, that probably my main message for maybe the first decade was you are enough. Couched in all kinds of different ways of saying it. Because I didn't believe I was enough. Somehow I got through the beginning part of my life believing that I was never good enough, or pretty enough, or smart enough, or talented enough, or anything enough. And I spent a whole lot of time staring at the tomb of you are not enough. The empty tomb which has no answers to my you are not enough. And then every time somebody got up and had to leave in the middle of my sermon, I was certain it was because I had thoroughly offended them and I was never going to see them again. Anytime somebody suggested that, oh, maybe I could do something different, I was like, oh my gosh, I failed. I utterly failed. They criticized my very being, my very soul. And so I started to find I'm not enough because I was looking for it everywhere through the lens of I am not enough. Even if I had to twist circumstances to make sure that that's how I saw it. All of this to say, coming back to the empty tomb, that if we stand and look at those empty tombs in our lives, we will not see that the Spirit has gone forth into the world and is waiting for us in our lives if we have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. If we'll stop looking at it through the lens of our fears and our not enoughs and our angers and our guilt and our regret and our loneliness and our whatever else we said in the midst of those tombs, we stop looking at that and instead watch for the acorns and the feathers and the flowers and the squirrels and the new life. That's what we'll find, the new possibilities and the new opportunities. And that's resurrection for you and for me. The youth in the white says, go look for it, for heaven's sakes. I don't know how many of you have heard the name Brother Lawrence. Brother Lawrence was a Carmelite monk. Very well known for his wisdom, his writings, but he didn't start out that way. He was born into a really difficult life, to a poor family in the year 1614, so a long, long time ago. And he had no prospects for having any money to have any sort of career, profession. So as a teenager, he enlisted in the army. And he went to war. And he saw horrible, awful things, had so much trauma, came home with a limp that pained him constantly, and what we would now call PTSD. And his answer was to join the monastery in hopes that praying about it would relieve some of his suffering. But from his mid-20s to his mid-30s, he lived a life full of depression and anxiety and a despair so great that he just wanted to kill himself. Till he finally decided that he needed to start turning away from the empty tomb of depression and anxiety and trauma and try to find the presence of God in the world. And it wasn't an easy change. The image that he held on to was the leafless tree that we see everywhere. And the knowledge that spring would eventually come and leaves would burst forth and there would be new life. And he felt in the image of that, he thought somewhere in the deepest darkness of his own soul, there was yet possibility for new life, for fruitfulness to break forth. So they assigned him to kitchen duty, which he was not thrilled about because he hated cooking and he couldn't stand for very long on his bum leg. And he struggled to try to, big word, surrender, not my word, his word, surrender to the situation, to accept the situation, to allow God to work in the midst of the situation. By trying again and again to turn away from all that held him stagnant and hurting and turn toward finding God in the littlest of things. While he was stirring the sauces, while he was chopping vegetables, while he was scrubbing the pots, while he was serving bowls of food to the other monks, to try and find the presence in each one of those little things. And you know what? The more he looked for it, the more he found it. And the more he found it, the more he found it. And it changed him, and people noticed the change. They noticed that he was happier, that he was more content, that he listened more deeply than he had before. But it was a choice, a really hard choice, and a choice not just once, but a choice over and over and over again to turn from the empty tomb that held him back to seeking God in his life, even in the very most mundane things of his life. And it transformed him, resurrected him, to use that word. You know, kids are really good at this. Kids are really good at wonder and awe and mystery and sacredness and seeing things that we don't see. Carrie Newcomer tells a story about taking a walk in the nature preserve with her 5-year-old. And you know, it's fall and the leaves are starting to fall and they bring up lunch and they go up the hillside and there's a little bench up there and they have their lunch overlooking the beautiful valley and the little creek below. And while they walk through the woods, her 5-year-old is one of those who talks incessantly, right? About, do you think the squirrels have names? And I tied my shoe all on myself this morning and look, here's a dusty pebble. And, oh, aren't those leaves really pretty? And, well, what do you know? On and on and on. And then suddenly she stopped. And she put a finger to her lips, quieter, Mommy. And she said, Mommy, listen. And they stood there watching the leaves fall and listening to the sort of the sigh of the forest for a while. And then she said, listen, do you hear? There are angels whispering in the branches. And her mom said, I do. They're very soft, but I can hear them. There are angels whispering in the branches if we'll look. You know, when I walk in the morning, at least half of the people that I see out walking have their earbuds in. And they're listening to music, or they're talking on the phone to somebody, or some of them actually carry like a radio so I can hear what they're listening to. Everybody's plugged in. We don't hear, and we don't see. We have to be intentional about looking for the divine in the world, looking for resurrection around us and in us. Let me close with at least part of a poem. So the story about angels and trees led me to a book called A Tree Full of Angels by Macrina Wiederkehr. She has a poem called The Harvest of God, Feasting on Your Theophanies. There's a big word that you can Google. theophanies. Actually, it means seeing God. It was only a small wind, rather gentle like a breeze. It blew a strand of hair across my forehead, and I knew that it was God. I was awakened by a tiny gleam of light. It slipped through my curtain onto my face. It drew me to my feet and onto the window, drawing back the curtains. Dawn stepped softly into my room. I knew that it was God. In the middle of my loneliness, the phone rang. A voice I knew so well said, "Hello, I love you." Love stirred in my soul. I knew that it was God. Rain fell gently on the thirsty ground. Slowly, carefully, steadily it came to an earth patched with waiting. Through those holy raindrops I walked, unafraid, without an umbrella. I knew that it was God. It was only a silver maple, but in the morning sunlight it was filled with heaven. I stood in a trance as one touched by angel wings. I knew that it was God. Oh God, I cried, endearing one, I love you. You cannot hide from me. Between the cracks of daily life, I find you waiting to be adored. You slip into my life like night and day, like stars and sunshine. I know that you are God. The Spirit goes forth from our empty tombs into the world. It's up to turn, to follow, to watch, to see, to seek, to find. The resurrection lies waiting for each of us. Amen.